Good morning. I'm Brian Zana with Sin City Datsuns, and again, instead of a part of the week, because I'm waiting on 4 or 5 new parts to be shipped to me, we're going to do a little bit of a technical video. So behind me here, you have the number 13 Datsun Roadster 1600 vintage race car, and I'm going racing next weekend at Eagles Canyon Raceway. It's a very technical course. The straightaway is only about a quarter-mile long. Lots of elevation change, lots of hard braking, lots of need for real good grunt or acceleration out of corners. And so I've been running my 562 here in the rear differential. It's a limited slip, and it's just not quite enough at that track. So what I did was I purchased a 512 or 513. It says 512, but I thought it was a 513. This one is a locker, and I'll show you the difference between an open and a locker. I've never run a locker before, but can't be too much different from my limited slip, and it's definitely better than an open. So what we're going to do is take a look at the difference between the two, and then we're going to go through what you need to do to change out your third member on your Datsun Roadster. Okay, so I turned the fan off so that you could hear me a little bit better this time. So this is a Detroit locker on one side and one of our stock Datsun Roadster open differentials on the right side. The right side is a 3.9. It's pulled out of a 4-speed 1600 Roadster. This one, like I said, was set up in a Roadster third member with a locker. As you can see, the locker has a closed area. You don't have any open bearings in it. And the open differential, as you can see clearly, you can see the spider gears and whatnot inside, and that's a very quick telltale sign of what it is. If you're not sure what the gearing is, you'll see on the gear here, if I can get it around to it, here we go, I cleaned it off. You'll see the ratio. You'll do a little math and figure out if you have the 3.7 or the 3.9 in your car. Sometimes people will buy a 1600 Roadster and somebody has already gone and put a 2-liter rear differential in the 3.7, especially if you're running a 5-speed instead of the 4-speed, which I plan on doing with the 67 stroker project there. I'm building a stroked 1600, so it will definitely get a 5-speed and the 3.7 differential. So now you can see the difference. I am going to go ahead and get this thing up on jack stands and start pulling off the tires and get set up, and then I'll show you what you need to take off to slide the axles out. I will also show you the removal of the drive shaft. This morning, and here in Texas, it's humid. So every time you're done with the compressor, you need to shut everything off, open up the valve at the bottom, and drain all the air out. Otherwise, you end up with a small puddle at the bottom of your compressor after a couple days, and you know that's going to happen. It's going to eventually rust out my tank. So every time I'm done, unlike in Nevada, where I was before, where it's super dry, you got to drain your tank. Even though you have a dryer, I've got a dryer here, and I got another dryer At this end, I have a dryer coming off of the compressor itself, so 3 dryers to make sure the air is really dry. Even with all that, the tank itself will rust out if you allow air to stay in it. Between the cooler nights and warmer days, you start getting that condensation and humidity. So I forgot to turn it on this morning. So now we're ready to go ahead and take the wheels off. Now that we have the wheels off, I'm going to show you underneath the car. There are just 4 quick bolts to take off on the drive shaft. And what you do is you get the 2 that you can reach, and then take the car out of gear, put it into neutral, spin it by hand so you can rotate to get the other 2, and then you put it back in gear so it doesn't spin while you're trying to break it loose. So here we are into the car. And you'll see the end of the drive shaft going into the 3rd member. You can go ahead and see those bolts. There's 2 of them. There's 2 on the other side. And once we get those loosened up, taken off, the drive shaft will move out of the way. We'll be able to drain the fluid out of this 3rd member, and the axle will be able to then start removing the bolts at the back here to remove, well, we're not removing, we're just going to slide the axles out enough to clear the 3rd member so we can pop it out. So let me get to taking that drive shaft off, and then we'll start working on sliding the axles out. All right, now we're going to drain the rear differential fluid out. There is a plug right at the very bottom of the rear differential housing. You'll see it, it's a threaded bung, and it has a spot for your 3/4 inch socket to go in. I usually use a little extension instead of just trying to get it with the ratchet itself, but you'll go ahead and you'll loosen that up, pull it out, make sure you have your pan here to catch the gear oil. One of the worst things in the world smelling is gear oil. Anything worse would be maybe burnt gear oil if you end up really burning up a rear differential, but you don't want to get it everywhere, so I'll put an old towel underneath. That way if any splattering and whatnot happens, I don't get it all over the place. So it doesn't take long for it to drain, but unfortunately it never seems to drain all of it. So when you go to take your 3rd member out, you're going to have differential fluid on your floor. So just be aware of that if you're working on concrete. You may want to lay down maybe a plastic tarp or something like that so you don't save the concrete. All right, so here's the rear differential. You'll see this one here is the drain plug. This one is the one you will use to refill it. And you just fill it until you get a little bit seeping out of the hole, and then you put the plug back in. So that is the one for draining. That is the one for filling. Draining, filling. As you can see real quick, if you look at my brake line there, see how there's a loop in it? So I made it the braided stainless steel brake line. There's a little bit of a loop. Well, I did that with my good buddy Keith Williams. We decided, well, you know what? If we want to make these changes of differentials at the racetrack, it's going to be a pain if we have to bleed the brake system every time we do that, having to take the brake line off. So what we did was I had those brake lines made longer so that they're just long enough for us to be able to slide the axles out and take up that slack so that we could get the 3rd member out without having to break the brake system lines open and have to go ahead and break or bleed the system out again. So kind of a neat little thing we did just to make sure that it was a little bit less time and less hassle at the track if we decided to swap it. But it does the same thing here at the the shop, I don't have to worry about taking and having to bleed the brake system when I'm done swapping out this rear differential. All right, so we got the drain plug out, and as you can see, I've wiped this off already. You want to make sure you get all the buildup and goop and whatnot off of it. But basically, this is what came off of that plug. It was mostly just a little bit of sludge buildup at the bottom. Not bad. I mean, the fluid looks really good still. And you can see just, if you look, you can see just a little bit of shiny, very, very small, almost looks like glitter, really fine pieces of metal. And so what that is, you know, it has bearings in the rear differential like anything else, and with a limited slip, you have clutches. So you're gonna have some wear. If you find large chunks, not good. But small, fine pieces is just some of the normal wear that you're gonna have, especially if you're running a race car like I am. If you're running a street car, you may not even find any of those little fines if you're not really jumping on the car a lot. But if you do, like I said, if there's really, really fine like that, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you're finding some larger pieces, I would look at having that third member looked at by a shop, or if you're comfortable doing it, pulling it, looking at carrier bearings, that sort of thing, to see if anything's starting to kind of break apart and start dropping those bigger pieces in. All right, so now we're ready to get the 4 axle bolts loosened up, the nuts taken off. They're nylock nuts. There's 4 of them, they're 1/2 inch. And so the first thing I'm going to do is get this drum out of the way. I gave it just a couple little taps with a rubber mallet just to break it loose a little bit. You see with mine, I've got the extended studs for racing. Yours will probably be a little bit easier to get off. This is a great time to inspect your shoes, make sure that the adjustment's good, make sure it's wearing properly, make sure that you're not getting any weird cracking, crazing, any type of odd wear in your drum as well. I had these shoes relined by a brake company. They're a lot more aggressive. They're a racing compound. And I have a brake proportioning valve inside the vehicle though, so I can dial up more rear brake, less rear brake as the track needs. And these shoes have been on here, gosh, for 5 race seasons now, and they're not even half worn yet. That'll tell you how little braking I do in this car. Remember, small cars like the Roadsters are what are called momentum racing cars, so what happens is we don't have the brute horsepower of a V8 to, you know, just make up for mistakes in a corner, so we need to take corners as fast as we can and keep that momentum, keep that speed up. So we don't do a lot of braking. The track I'll be running this upcoming weekend is probably the heaviest braking track I've ever raced at. I was told it was designed by someone who was a Porsche enthusiast, and I guess guys with Porsches like heavy braking in, tight corners, and then really heavy acceleration out. So like I said, the brakes are holding up really well on the race car here. I don't see any odd wearing. So you'll see inside here, and I'll get the camera and show you a little bit closer, is that you've got your grease catcher, and the bolts go through the grease catcher, have a flat side to them so that they don't spin. Now, if you have an older grease catcher that is really worn, what will happen sometimes is, because it's rubber and there's reinforced with metal on the inside of the rubber, sometimes the rubber gets brittle and it'll break off, and then the head of the bolt will want to spin even with that flat end. And what I've had to do before is just stick a flathead screwdriver between the flat side of the head and the worn out portion of the grease catcher, so that you're able to get that to loosen the nylock nut and not have the head of the bolt spinning. I'm hoping that I don't have that issue, because when I put this car together, I literally used new everything. So I've got new adjusters, new brake cylinders, new grease catchers, new axle seals, new axle bearing. I mean, everything on this car when I built it was brand new. Not to say that over 5 race seasons it's not going to possibly get brittle, but I'm hoping not. So let's take a little bit closer look at that. Okay, so here is the grease catcher. That's this square piece here. You can see it has these little nubs, these flanges, that the flathead side of that bolt will lean up against, and then on the back side you have, boy, that's a little dark, gonna be hard to see. On the back side, you have, that's a little bit better, you have the nylock nuts, which is right there. And you'll have 4 of those on the back side. And so once I take those 4 off, I'll be able to grab the axle, give it a pull, and be able to slide it out and get this whole assembly to slide out towards me, and that will disengage them from the third member. And I'll be able to then pull the third member out and put the 512 third member in, then push the axles back in, re-engage them. So I am gonna need my little helpers for this. I'm gonna bring out my 2 teenage kids, Emily and Mason, and they're gonna be my helpers pulling on these axles, because it's just, the loop on this brake line is just enough to get the axles disengaged from the third member. So I can't pull on the axle on both sides and pull the third member out at once, so it's kind of a 3-person deal. So let me get these axle bolts off on both sides, and then I'll show you how they'll kind of pull out. And then all we have to do left after that is remove the bolts or the nuts off of the third member, and then we will be able to pull that third member out. There you can see the differential fluid. It's still dripping a little bit, and that's why I do it really early on, so as I'm working on the axles, it's still kind of dripping, and anything extra is gonna hopefully come out and not all over my floor when I pull the third member. So, all right, so I got the 4 nylock nuts off. Like I said, I used everything new. They're in good shape. I'll probably reuse them this one time. But now all you do is literally, you grab a hold of the axle and the housing inside the brake assembly here, and you just, and out it comes. I mean, it just slides nice and easy then. The reason I leave these bolts in like this, I try to bring it all out at once. It's such a pain to realign everything and the shims and everything, so I try to get it all out as one like this, so I'm pushing in on the axle while I'm using the back of the brake dust shield to kind of use to pull. And you saw I didn't have to use any force. If you're having to use a lot of force to pop it loose, there might be an issue where somebody maybe kind of put the axle in where instead of the splines fitting nice and even like this, maybe they kind of almost like cross-threading a bolt, kind of just put them on an angle. So just be aware of that. You might want to pull your axle all the way out to take a look at those splines and make sure that they're not damaged. But let's get around and do the other side. All right, so it's wrong. I really didn't need the kids. As you can see, those axles are slid out. That loop's long enough that, look, it's not even tight. And it was able to disengage the third member. This is where the axle slide in. And so here you have my 462 limited slip. You can see that here's the limited slip. The clutches are inside here. Then you have the locker, which will be going into the car. Limited slip, locker, and here's your open diff. So you can see the difference really quickly. Also, obviously, a limited slip, if you're spinning one tire, the other tire is going to move in the same direction. With an open diff, you spin one tire and the other tire is going to spin the opposite direction. I believe the locker spins in the same direction as well, like an LSD. So I'm going to prep the axle housing and get all the old gasket material off and get this one cleaned up a little bit more. It looks like it's pretty clean, but I'm going to use a little bit more cleaner around the flange, make sure it's nice and cleaned, except the gasket sealer and the new gasket. All right, so now it's time to install the 512 locker. Hopefully give us a little bit more pull out of the corners this upcoming weekend. And so what I do is the housing itself, I keep it nice and clean. New gasket, of course. And what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of gasket maker on the differential itself, but I don't put any on the side of the housing. And so far, with as much as I race and how hard I drive, I've had 0 leaks this way. It just makes it easier because it's very hard to clean up that gasket maker in between the studs on the differential housing. So this is how I do it. If you like to put a little bit on the housing itself, that's completely up to you. I just know what has been working for me, and like I said, it's been just throwing a little bit of this on before I put the gasket. And again, I'm not putting a ton. It's basically just enough to make it stick so it doesn't move when I'm putting it onto the housing. I try to use original Nissan gaskets. They're getting harder to find. I know that my good friend Kevin Datsun bought a bunch from me not too long ago, and I'm quickly running out of originals, and I'm getting down to one more after this one, but I'm looking at having some aftermarket ones made in the same style and the same, obviously, pattern and whatnot as the original Nissan ones. So, all right, so the last thing to do, I'm going to pull the fill plug right there. That's the fill plug right there. And I'm going to throw in some of this Valvoline full synthetic gear oil. It's 75, weight 140. It says contains limited slip additive. Now, if you're doing just a stock rear differential, open differential, you do not need to spend the, I think it's $14 a pouch or a quart for this. You can go ahead and just get a standard 75, 140 gear oil and put it in. But if you're running a limited slip or you're racing it or whatnot, full synthetic's always a great idea. And like I said, limited slip, it helps keep the clutches in good shape. And I imagine it's not going to hurt the locker in this one. So this is the last step. I already threw on the tires. I'm going to torque those down here in a minute after I fill up the rear differential, and then I'm going to take it for a ride. I might even go and break out one of my GoPros to throw into one of its, say, one of the mounts there, forward or backwards, and capture the test drive through the neighborhood as well. But that would be the last step, is making sure you fill it back up. And like I said, you're gonna put the gear oil in that hole until some starts to dribble out of it, and then that's it, it's full.